the sermon notes in your bulletin and on the screen. I want to share this morning part one of from the topic, why in the world are we here? Why in the world are we here? And any organization, institution, or business must justify its existence as it carries out the very purpose for which it was created. For instance, a grocery store justifies its existence as it continues to make groceries available to people. For what would you think if you walked into a grocery store and said, I want to buy a dozen of bananas? And they responded to you and simply said, we are sorry, we don't sell food here. But now we do have some motor oil if you'd like to have that. I'm sure you would agree with me, it wouldn't be long, would it, until not only you would stop going there, but it wouldn't be long before they would be out of existence. Or what if you went to a school or college or university and walked into the registrar's office and they said at the front desk, what can we do for you? And you said that I would like to sign up for some courses in order to educate myself in several areas. But they said to you, we don't have any courses available here, but now we do sell bananas if you'd like to have some of those. I'm sure that that institution would not be in existence too long, and nor would you ever go back there to receive any kind of training. Well, did you know that what's true of grocery stores and what's true of universities is also true of all organizations and institutions? They justify their existence only as long as they accomplish the very purpose for which they were created. In other words, every entity, every organization must come to grips and answer the question, why in the world are they here? But I'd like to let you know this morning that what's true of businesses, what's true of associations, what's true of institutions is also true of the institution called the Church of Jesus Christ. And not only it's also true concerning the Church of Jesus Christ, but I declare this morning and the next time we come back to this area that even when it comes to you and when it comes to me as an individual believer, we must answer the question from time to time, why in the world are we here? Which reminds me of that elementary teacher that sent home the following notes to the parents of a particular student at the end of the day, and it essentially said your child was very distracting in class today. He seems to have forgotten why he's really here. Well, my friends, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's the college down the street, or even an inattentive student, as believers, as long as you and as long as I am in the classroom of this world, it's absolutely paramount that we understand why in the world are we here. And here in our text, in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 13 to 15, 3 or 4 verses, Jesus really summarizes the purpose and clarifies the function and the purpose of believers in the world. He answers the question, why in the world are we here? And he ultimately reduces it to one word or purpose or function. And that is the reason you and I are here as believers is that we are to be an influence for him. We are to be a force for good in this world in which we live. And in verses 13 and 15, 13 and 14 specifically, Jesus uses two metaphors. He uses a couple of pictures, that is, word pictures that describe the one-word purpose for which God has you here and for which God has me here. And the two metaphors or two word pictures to describe your purpose and my purpose is that he says in chapter 5, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. And then in verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world. And friends, God says that our purpose is to be the salt of the earth. We are to be the light of the world. And when we come to grips with the nature of salt and the nature of light today and the next time we come back to it, the singular thing about salt, the singular thing is about light, is that salt and light have an influence in anything and everything they come into contact with. And so first of all, when it comes to why in the world are we here, we need to see, if we're going to understand why in the world are we here, I would like to say we need to understand the kind of world that is here, okay? And so therefore, first of all, I want to look at what I want to call the mess that we're in, okay? The mess that we are in. Again, before we come to grips with why we're here, what in the world are we in the midst of? And when it comes to the mess that we're in, we need to understand is that the world now in which we live is increasingly dark and increasingly decayed. And I believe I want to emphasize the word. Not only is the world in which we live decaying, okay, and not only the world in which we live decayed, but if I were to emphasize one word in that sentence, it is the world in which we live is not only dark, is not only decaying, but it is increasingly dark and increasingly decaying. Yes, as I've mentioned, our text is verses 13 and 15, but we really, when it comes to the Word of God and Bible study and the application of the Word of God, we cannot and should not divorce what Jesus is about to say in verse 13 and 15. Watch this now. He's about to say and is saying to you and me, why in the world are we here? But see, we should divorce verses 13 and 15 from what he's already said in verses 1 through 12 concerning the kind of world that is already there at that time. Would you allow me to talk about the world at that time and then come back to the world at this time? Because the context of verses 13 and 15, you are the light, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. It is in the context of verses 1 through 12, which now in all chapters 5, 6, and 7 is actually the Sermon on the Mount, okay? But in verses 1 through 12, Jesus has been talking about the Beatitudes. We know them as the Beatitudes, but if you was to unlock and open up the box of the Beatitudes are actually God's antidote to the kinds of attitudes and the kind of lifestyle that we are to live in the midst of the world at that time. In other words, every beatitude was and was a solution to the world at that time. For instance, the world at that time was a high-minded world where people were proud and arrogant. And so in chapter 5, verse 3, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. That is, blessed are the humble, because at that time, the world at that time, the mindset was high-minded and arrogant. I want to say that not only the world at that time was a high-minded world, but it was also a very hurting world. Because that's why he said in chapter 5, verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for what they shall be comforted. The pains of life left the world at that time very hurting. Not only was it a high-minded world, not only was it a hurting world, but it was a unharnessed world. And what was unharnessed? He says, blessed are the meek. And did you know meek just means power under control? But did you know that power can tear up something if it's unharnessed? Don't you, if there's anybody here, don't you know power can be abusive if folks don't know how to rein it in? And so in Jesus' time, the world was not only high-minded, the world was not only hurting, the world was not only unharnessed, but it was also at that time a hungry world. And therefore, that's why he says in chapter 5, verse 6, blessed are those who do what? Hunger and what? Thirst after what? Righteousness, because what? They shall be what? Filled. And friends, it had little or nothing to do with the emptiness of their stomach, but rather the emptiness of their soul. And they were hungry for purpose and hungry for meaning. And he said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for Jesus Christ. It was a high-minded world. It was a hurting world. It was an unharnessed world. But it was also a hungry world. But I declare it was a helpless world. In other words, people didn't want to help others. And so he says in chapter 5, verse 7, blessed are the merciful, those who have a merciful spirit and willing to help others. It was also an unholy world. And so therefore he says in chapter 5, verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, because the world at that time, full of unwholesome thoughts, impurities in heart. The world at that time was a high-minded world. The world at that time was a hurting world. The world at that time was an unharnessed world. The world at that time was a hungry world. It was a helpless world. It was an unholy world, but it was also an unhealed world, because it says in chapter 5, verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, because the world at that time, there was the absence of reconciliation and peace in the midst of war. It was also an harassed world, because he says in chapter 5, verse 10, blessed are those who are what? Persecuted for what? Righteousness' sake. It was a harassed world. People, and Christians in particular, were suffering wrongly for standing up for doing what was right. I said that was the world then. And when he said, you and I, we are to be salt and light, he had said it in the context of serving notice that the world at that time was a dark world. The world at that time was a messed up world. The world at that time was a decaying world. But you know, and I know, you don't have to go back 2,000 years ago, do we? Oh, bless the name of God. to wake up and realize that we also live in a decaying world, don't we? We also live in a dark world. All you have to do is, you don't have to go back 2,000 years ago. All you have to do is simply pick up yesterday's newspaper. I didn't say last week's newspaper. I didn't say last month's newspaper. I said yesterday's newspaper, and as I picked up yesterday's newspaper, there was a headline there: picking on our babies now. 2 more kids die from shootings, bringing the region's total to 22. And the reality is that we live in a world where violence and murder and all of that, it levels now that didn't even exist not just 2,000 years ago, didn't exist 20 or even 10 years ago. And when I saw the headline, and certainly the ages of those lives that are being snuffed out, there was something in my spirit that said, and I got a suspicion that the devil could care less about what the ages are. Now, we should, but the devil can care less. And I appreciated the prayer this morning reminding us the Bible says that the devil, he comes to steal, he comes to what? Kill, and he comes to what? Destroy. But Jesus has come that we might have what? Life this morning, and have it more abundantly. And the devil don't care. His business. See, he knows why he's in the world. Oh, bless the name of God. He understands his agenda is to kill, to steal, and to destroy. As I picked up not last week's paper, but yesterday's paper, right next to that article was another one about, won't call the name, but a particular actress who was convicted and given 14 days in jail for the college admission scandal. And it's an example of where the famous and the powerful who are able to use money to their advantage when it comes to college admissions. See, when it came to you and me getting in school, either whether it was getting in school or us getting out of school, I don't want to pretend, I did have to get my transcript recently, and I did see cum laude on one of them, but I do want you to know, most of us, it wasn't graduating cum laude, magna cum laude, summa. It was that Lord help, Lord help me. You see, understand what I'm saying? And our parents didn't have the money to get us in or get us out or whatever, but I just want to let you know that not only were those who abused power 2,000 years ago, if you have enough money, we live in a time where people seemingly can get away if they have enough money. We are in the same front page, the next article, another example where there's been abuse of power and all of the sexual immorality in which we live. And yet, whether it was yesterday's paper, I happened to read, it said there's a rising youth suicide rate. And even 6-year-olds seemingly don't want to live anymore. And according to the Journal of American Medical Association, that the youth suicide rate is higher than it's ever been. And there's just this danger for you and me to think that's out there, okay? And that it doesn't impact us, and it's not in our families or whatever, but overall, I'm coming to grips with that we live in a world that is dark. We live in a world that is decaying, to say nothing about all of the struggles as it relates with various drug epidemics and this and that. We need to realize that we live in times, we live in a world that is not only dark or decaying, and in some ways that's nothing new, which is why I started with the Beatitudes, okay, and took that time to 2,000 years ago. Frankly speaking, ever since, as I say from time to time, me and your, my, whatever, you can tell I didn't get an A in English, but anyway, whichever, it's supposed to be you and me, or y'all tell me later on. But ever since our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother sinned in the Garden of Eden from the beginning of time, darkness, decay set in. But our point this morning is that it is not only do we live in a dark, decaying world, but friends, it is increasing. The kind of stuff that's going on today, Lord have mercy. And see, all the craziness that's going on, it's showing up. It's showing up in the classroom. Yes, it is. Those are your teachers, and when our first lady comes in from school, and we debrief her day, and she tells me about the stuff that's going on in the classroom. I'm not talking about senior high. We're talking about kindergarten, first grade, third grade. I know some of you, I've whether it's wise or unwise, been transparent, and let you know that I didn't grow up necessarily as a goody two shoes. Some think that. And then I guess it's too late for me to stop telling y'all that stuff, because one of you, one day just said, "Bishop, you was bad when you was growing up." And it was, they didn't say, "Bishop, you were bad." They just emphasized, "Bishop, you was bad when you was growing up." Isn't that right, Sister Annette? And so, and then just in defense of myself, I wasn't bad. I just had a lot of fun doing bad things. Now, Sister Austin, that was before you and Reverend Austin, Lord used y'all to lead me to Christ and all that other good stuff. That other person next to you, that's different. But you know what? The kind of stuff that's going on, the stuff that's going on now in the schools and in the classrooms, I never would have thought about it. You understand what I'm saying? And some of you know, whether it's the cussing out the teacher and they can't cuss you back out. Oh my goodness! A few weeks ago, First Lady just tell me a certain kindergarten apparently cussed her out, and she trying to be helpful. Well, the phone rang, and one of our children's on the other line. And one of them must have said, "Mom, how you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm trying to cool down your dad right now." Because you know what? Now see, I know there's all kind of crazy stuff going on, and we talk about crazy stuff. Parents get mad and want to go beat up the teacher. Come on now, crazy parents get mad jumping on the school bus. Well, that day, there was a teacher's spouse that's mad. I'm ready to go up and find a little fella and say, "What? Now, you said what to my wife?" And I believe that she thought that this particular son was going to be sympathetic, would cool dad down. Well, I said, "Give me the phone," because see, I know him. You see what I'm saying? And see, I know the particular one that I done heard when somebody is a mess with his sister, and I could tell he meant business. You see, he started referring to bothering his little sister. And so all I had to say is now tell you what. Now, what would you feel? Are you interested in your mother being talked to like that? And I knew him. He probably ready to jump through the phone and get on my side. You see what I'm saying? I just want you to know that we just live in a crazy world. We live in a dark world, and I know I have to move on, but I want to make it crystal clear that, one, when it comes to understanding and when it comes to coming to grips with why we are in the world, we have to understand the kind of world that we are in. And so, one, there is the mess that we're in, but then not only is there the mess that we're in, but secondly, there is the medicine. I want to hasten on the medicine that we need, because it's in the background of coming to grips with the mess of the world at that time. Jesus writes up a prescription for his agenda to address all of the mess in the world at that time. And it's in the context of the decay of the world that he says, he starts talking about in verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. You are, verse 14, the light of the world. And see, when it comes to God's remedy to the stuff that's going on in the society in which we live, I want you to know the medicine that is needed in a messed up world. First of all, we have to realize that I want to say that the moral predicaments of this society, listen now, require divine spiritual remedies, okay? See, just say it maybe more simply. If you got a moral mess on your hand, okay, doesn't it seem like I take some moral medicine? Is that right? In other words, one of the things sometimes I get them all mixed up. Those of you who know more than me, sometimes I get the difference in a bacterial infection mixed up with a viral infection. But I do know this. Okay, you're right. I like that. That's good. That's good. Either way, you're sick. Yeah, either way, messed up. Okay, thank you, sir. And so I've intentionally or unapologetically taken plenty of time to serve notice that we live in a sick, messed up world, okay? And so the issue becomes, what is to be done? What is the answer? What is the remedy? And I still want to say, when it comes to the doctor, that doctor needs to know, listen now, more than just you sick. Is that right? And more, when I show up, whether it's at the hospital, at the urgent care, at the primary care physician, or those specialists, they start talking about, well, Mr. Jones, you got a bacterial infection. And so therefore, we're going to treat it this way. Or they'll say, you have a viral infection. And if I have it halfway straight, I ain't saying I have it straight, apparently you don't take a bacterial approach to a viral problem. Is that right? And you don't take a viral approach, help me out now, to a bacterial problem. Now, all I want to do is get well. Give me something. And some of you have done what I've done, marched myself in there, made up my mind what they need to do to make me well. And when they don't give me what I want or what I had in mind, and when they don't give me the antibiotic that I thought I needed, and they start talking about you got virus and an antibiotic won't help your virus, and I don't want to hear all that. You understand what I'm saying? Now, some of you have done it as well. And in the same way, when it comes to the medicine, when it comes to the situation we are in, Jesus understood. Now stick with me. Jesus understood that in light of the world in which they live, the medicine to the mess, they have to be consistent. And so what Jesus says, that in the midst of a decaying, in the midst of a putrid world, he says, I'm going to come back to the you part, but guess what he administers? So Dr. Jesus pulls out his scripts, as it were, and he issues a prescription for salt. Can you believe that? Salt. Now, most of us, well, I'll just talk about me, okay? Salt is the last thing I need. Matter of fact, went to the restaurant this week, ordered me some neck bones. I used to be able to brag that I don't put salt on my food no more. And you know why? Honestly, I cannot remember the last time I put some salt on some food. And this week was, I ain't talking about my house. I said at a restaurant. I said a restaurant. I may be dumb, but I ain't stupid this morning. I didn't have to put no salt on those neck bones because they were so filled with salt. Even my salt-loving self had to put down what were delicious otherwise neck bones because it was so, so salty. But see, in Jesus' time, salt had a very definite purpose. Salty meat in Jesus' time was common. See, in Jesus' time, they did not have the refrigerators, okay? You know the deal. We got these refrigerators today. They talk to you. They light up. You program them and all these other good things. Some of you remember when they used to be called ice boxes. Is that right? See, you just date yourself anytime you say the ice box. Well, in Jesus' time, they had no refrigerators, and essentially salt, yes, salt had flavor, and we'll look at the flavor another time. Salt was a means of exchange whereby, the phrase worth your salt. Actually, in those days, they would actually affirm friendship based on some salt. And so if we wanted to do a deal, I would actually give you some salt to show my sincerity. And so in those days, salt was a source of value. Salt was for flavoring and seasoning, but ultimately in those days, salt was a means for preservation. In other words, and some of you, again, depending on your age, you may be able to remember those days. You may be able to remember those times that rather than putting meat in the refrigerator, meat was salted down, as it were, and the salt would do what? The salt would slow down and was an answer to the decay that was in the meat, as it were. Matter of fact, when I think about how in those days, Jesus' days, and not long ago in those days, the idea one person says he remembers her growing up in North Carolina. He says that as a young boy, when his father would go hunting, he would bring back the meat, and it was the son's responsibility to rub salt into the meat that his father had brought home. Well, one particular day he did, with bless his little heart, he said he had worn out his young muscles by salting down all of the meat. And when company arrived one day, his mother asked